Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us. Today we've got Dr. Melissa Burt, who's the Assistant Dean for Diversity and Inclusion in the Walter Scott Junior College of Engineering at Colorado State University. That's one of the longest titles I've had to try and introduce. But we're very welcome. We're very pleased to have you to speak with us today. Dr. Burt originally has a degree in meteorology and a doctorate in atmospheric science. So we're very intrigued by your science, and we're very interested to know about your role in diversity and inclusion at Colorado State University. So thank you very much for connecting in with us. This is part of our series to celebrate Black History Month. So we do thank you for coming during a very busy month, and we're very interested to hear your story. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Donna. And thanks to all of you for joining today. And I guess I'll say good afternoon as well. I'm still kind of caffeinating right now. So hopefully, this will just go in the way that it's going to go. But like Donna said, my name is Melissa Burt. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I won't go through the extra long title right now, but my work is around diversity and inclusion. And also I have a research scientist position in the atmospheric science department. And so it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to share with you all today kind of my story, my journey into the atmospheric sciences, and also kind of coming out as a leader within the diversity and inclusion, I'll say, enterprise here. And again, like I was saying before we got started, I wish that I could be with you all today in the UK, but I will just have to do here in very cold Colorado this morning. So again, thank you for that. And also just learning that this is Black History Month in the UK, which was something new to me because the Black History Month here in the United States is celebrated within February. So I have a little bit of history that I need to do some digging on as to why it may be different between the different countries. So either way, I'm honored to be here today, and I hope that there's something that each of you will take away from this conversation today. So here just on my home slide is just a couple photos of me that it was kind of fun to pick out from me as a kid. I'm from the state of Maryland, which is on the East Coast of the United States. I've spent so much time here at Colorado State University, and this is just a wonderful photo that a friend of mine took a few years back, and it has a wonderful picture of lightning there as well that I always like to use. Let's see, there we go. So I just wanted to share with you all this quote because it's a quote that I really love. And I think the way that I usually start off presentations is really by sharing a story, because I think stories are really powerful. I think it's a great way to learn about why people do what they do and how they kind of navigate in the journeys that they have. So this quote is from Michelle Obama, who was a former First Lady here in the US, and I'll say my forever First Lady because she's a wonderful person. But something that she said in her book called Becoming was that, and I quote, "I'm an ordinary person who found herself on an extraordinary journey. In sharing my story, I hope to help create space for other stories and other voices to widen the pathway for who belongs and why." And I think that last component of her quote, who belongs and why, is something that has truly resonated with me. When I think a little bit about, how I got to where I am today, the idea of thinking about who belongs, who can be a scientist, what is the work of a scientist, is something that I found to be very central and essential to kind of my thought process in the work that I've been doing. So I think it's always good to think about, who you think of when you think of a scientist, maybe when you were a child. What do scientists do? Are there reasons or barriers that can keep people from pursuing the science that they want to go do, or even just in general to be a scientist? So just to sometimes kind of sit back and reflect and think about that from time to time. So also sharing a little bit more as to like who I am. I think that this is something that's really important, and I think it's something different that we don't always think about as scientists, right? Like we just stick to that technical side of things, and we don't always develop those relationships and get to know people on a more personal basis. And I do think it's something that is really important, at least in my line of work that I do now. But to say that this is who I am. I'm a mom, I'm a sister, a wife, an educator, a scientist, an advocate for STEM. I am a champion, and maybe not in the running world, as you see that one photo there, but I am a champion for why we should be thinking about and talking about and using the idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion as a foundation to how we do our science. And I think, and I know that all of us are kind of juggling so many things in our lives these days, if it's because of, the pandemic and the situation that we're in, if it's due to being overcommitted in the workspaces that we're in. I think it's important to be mindful of the many different roles and the many different hats that we do have. And I think for me, something that I've always tried to do is to be perfect in all these roles, which obviously is not something that we can do. And what I've really come to terms with is really the fact that in order to kind of balance the different worlds that I find myself in, it's really to think about it among the idea of kind of the continuous movement among many of these different unstable states that we see in this place. And so here's a photo of me as I was like digging through stuff in the basement here. Is a picture of me at 7 years old. And at this time in my mind, I really loved going to the beach. I really loved doing science experiments. I have always loved music in that space. But I was also very scared of things like tornadoes, snakes, and I probably could come up with a couple of other things in that line. But I think this idea of being scared of tornadoes was really what sparked my curiosity and my drive to want to think about meteorology, atmospheric science as a potential career path. And for those of you who may not be familiar with kind of the United States and where tornadoes actually occur, this blue star or black star here is kind of over the state of Maryland, which is where I was from. And the colors that you see here on this map really indicate the prominent areas for where tornadoes actually exist. So I had like this deathly fear of a tornado coming through the area, which wasn't even something that actually happened that often, which was something that was quite funny to me. But one thing that I did at this time, I would call the local National Weather Service line, which I guess in the UK would be kind of the Met Office line, every single day to see if we would be under a threat of a tornado warning or tornado of anything in that shape or form. So it was just something that was really like prominent in my mind for something, and something that really scared me in that space. But I think what started as this fear of tornadoes really sparked my curiosity to wanting to understand like why the weather works, what drives the weather that we see. And then ultimately I found out, that this is something that you can study, right? That you can go into university and get a degree in, and you don't have to be a person who's just forecasting the weather on television. So there's this whole wide array of research that's out there for you to do, for you to explore, and really to gain the knowledge in those areas. So from here, of course, I then went to university. I went to Millersville University, which is in Pennsylvania. Here's a beautiful picture of part of our campus at that time. And for me, I had all those wonderful, exciting things going on in my head about, going to college, being on my own finally, having the opportunity to kind of explore science and math in many different ways. I was doing really well in my classes. I had a wonderful group of friends. But for me, things weren't just happening for me. I think what I realized is that, my initial excitement and curiosity factor kind of started to dwindle for some reason. And I wasn't quite sure what was really causing that thing or that mindset for me. And so one day I remember going to my advisor, which is the woman pictured here. And this is obviously a more recent photo of us than when I was an undergrad. But the one thing that I said to her was that I think I don't belong here. I think that this field is not a space for me. And I think I really should consider like leaving meteorology altogether, right? And she said, if you're going to leave meteorology, what are you going to do? And my naiveness at that time was like, oh, I didn't really think about what I should be doing, right? If I'm not doing this. And so I thought, I'm not that great at history. I don't really care about, many other fields. And so maybe I just need to kind of stick with this and just see what else is out there. So she encouraged me to try one more thing before I decided to give up. And it was actually to apply to an internship program in Colorado, very much focused on giving students from historically marginalized backgrounds in STEM the opportunity to conduct research in that area. The program was called SOARS, which you can see what that stands for here. And the beauty of this program was really to expose us to research. And in fact, when I was thinking back on this over the weekend, this was actually my first introduction to thinking about the polar regions and to think about the Arctic. Was a project that I did during this time focused around paleoclimate, but it was my first entry point, I'll say, into the polar work that I now do. But I think the other benefit of this program was that it introduced me to lots and lots of people who actually looked like me, who were weather fanatics like I was, and also gave me that community, which I didn't realize was something that I was missing, but ultimately it was something that I was actually missing at that time. And so seeing people being successful as scientists who cared about some of the similar things that I did was something that was really important and valuable to me, and really made it for a transformative experience for me. Because by connecting with these individuals in this way, it also helped me become more re-energized about science, and also giving me that kind of sense of belonging and also community space that I needed. So in kind of reflecting back on that experience within the SOARS program, I realized that what I was really feeling at my university was feelings of isolation, feelings as though I didn't belong. There was not a lot of diversity within any of my science courses. I had very little women faculty, so no role models in that perspective. And also, and I guess I probably shouldn't have used this acronym, but no faculty members of color. So BIPOC, if you're not aware, stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color as faculty. And I think that's probably similar to maybe what you say in the UK is BAME. That's what your group, yeah, that's what it's called. I was like, I read about this and I was like, oh, either way, I really didn't see people who looked like me as faculty members in that space. And I think I was finally, after this SOARS experience, able to kind of connect some of these dots as to what was making my experience not a good one for me. And there's no bad harm or no bad thoughts towards the institution that I was at. I think at that time, we weren't really thinking about, what are the experiences that people are feeling as they are students in these spaces. And we more so were focused around the technical components of, we just need to educate people in that space. So I think a lot of this kind of stuck in the back of my head as to things that were really important to me that I was not getting at all. And I think you can think about this from being very excited about the opportunities that are out there, the opportunities that were ahead of me, was kind of thinking about it being like this piece of paradise that you see, right? And what I really realized during this was that I was excited about the opportunity, but what was really kind of taking a toll on me was more about the experience. And I know that this photo is very, very dramatic. But it's kind of like when you have those feelings of isolation, or when you have those feelings as though you don't think that you belong, you really do think that you're out on this pier kind of by yourself in this kind of doom or gloom space, right? And so what I really started to think about was that, how can I have an impact in the experiences of people who may come after me, right? To make sure that we're creating opportunities that can be like this, but that their experience is also of this level of something that can be, that you really enjoy and that really can help you prosper in that space. So after kind of undergrad, I decided to go to Colorado State University to pursue graduate school in atmospheric science, which was also very exciting. My research at that time very much focused around paleoclimate modeling, actually. I was looking at the last glacial maximum and really trying to have an understanding of the hydrological and energy cycles and the impacts that this had on North America during these periods of time. So again, I kind of like enjoyed the work that I was doing, enjoying the people that I was around, but I started to feel those kind of same sentiments of isolation and needing other outlets in order for me to be able to succeed in those spaces. And what I found, which was like a light in the tunnel for me, was an opportunity to engage with a group that was called the Little Shop of Physics here. And what their work really focused around was getting younger audiences, especially people from either underserved or underrepresented backgrounds, to see the value and the importance of STEM, and really showing them that one, science is something that can be fun, and it's also something that you actually do, right? We do science, right? We just don't think of science as being this kind of this other thing. But I think what I found in engaging in the outreach and working with lots of teachers and giving guest lectures around weather and climate at the time was that I would ask students, you know, like, what does a scientist, who is a scientist, right? Or what does a scientist look like? And although I'm literally standing in front of them in these rooms, they would draw pictures of, you know, a person like this, or a person with like crazy white hair. And I don't have white hair at this moment either, but like very, very distinct images of who they think scientists can actually be. So although I'm like talking with them about science, showing them about the work that I do, they still weren't getting the idea of like who could actually be people who are conducting work in this way. And so I thought this was really interesting and really got me thinking about kind of representation and how much representation actually matters in the work that we do. So after kind of completing my master's degree, I decided that I was actually ready to stop graduate work. I was looking for a different outlet and decided to take a job with a National Science Foundation Science and Technology Center that really focused on education and diversity. And in this space, I think I was thinking about, you know, how can we make sure that students see people who look like them, you know, doing this type of work? How can we ensure that people are within environments that are helping them thrive, so that feelings of isolation and a lack of belonging maybe aren't there as much or as prominent as much? So in this job, I was able to really design products or design programs that really focused around encouraging participation, increasing access, and also representation for members from historically underrepresented groups. And with this, I was able to also really develop relationships with people from a variety of different backgrounds, and showing them, you know, this is what science is, and this is how you can be engaged in that activity. And really providing many people, as I said, opportunities in that space. And again, if you recall, like the SOURCE program was something that was really transformative for me. And so I wanted to ensure that I was able to create programs like a research experience for undergraduates program that really help students from diverse backgrounds get engaged and to have early exposure to research. But with this, I found as though I was kind of straddling two worlds. I was straddling like my science world, I was straddling my diversity world, and how could I really bring these two things together? And I also felt as though people were trying to make me choose one or the other, because you can't do both, is what people continued to tell me in that space. And so I said, you know, the way that I'm going to be able to do both, I guess, is I'm going to get my PhD, and I'm going to be the one that makes the decisions as to how we do the work that we do in that space. So I decided to come back to grad school, continue my job for the Science and Technology Center, and really focus now on something that was super exciting to me. This is an image of the Arctic and lots of sea ice that you can see there. And really taking time to understand the interactions that happen within Arctic clouds, radiation, and sea ice, and how does this manifest itself kind of in the present climate, but also as we look towards future climates in that capacity. And also kind of daydreaming, and this hasn't actually happened yet, but I always have hoped that I may have an opportunity to do some research on kind of an icebreaker like this, and be able to fully immerse myself into the Arctic experience. So maybe one day that will happen, but it has not happened just yet. But I think what I found in kind of straddling these two worlds and really talking with people and talking with our faculty as to the importance of the research that we're doing, but also to creating a space and environment that is supportive of students, is how can we create this culture of support and this culture of inclusion? Because we say that we want to have an environment that is welcoming, but are we really doing that for our students? And so in my time working for the National Science Foundation Science and Technology Center, I really worked with our faculty and training them to think about not just that technical piece, but really understanding and developing relationships with our students and our staff members and faculty in those spaces. But by straddling these two fences, I was also able to not only just publish in the scientific literature, but also publish in the education literature as well. And here's just one of the articles that I published that really looked at the impact of the Arctic, specifically in a warming climate. So I'm just going to do that slight plug if you want to learn more about that work that I did here. And I also had to give it kind of a title that maybe sound a little bit more interesting. Although our reviewers really hated it at the time. They're like, you're being too, I don't know, artsy, I don't know. Anyway, I encourage you all to check out that paper if you're interested in that. But not only just talking about, Arctic sea ice, I also was able to really speak about some of the work that I did around increasing diversity of our graduate program. And how do we create that culture and that environment that really can show, that really can have our students be successful and also thrive in those specific spaces. And so this article really much just focused around how can we translate those best practices around sense of belonging and community and mentoring into success of getting opportunities and increasing the participation of more students from underrepresented backgrounds in that space. So what I learned in much of the work that I did, as a student myself, and then kind of matriculating into that position as a education and diversity manager, is that we actually can't just focus on diversity, right? Like diversity alone is not that specific goal. It is a goal that we want to see, but is not the only goal. And it's really important that we create and nurture a culture of support, a culture of mentoring, and a culture of inclusion, where community is something that is really essential to people's success, and also that the climate and the environment of our actual workplace can really be a showstopper. It can really be where that kind of pipeline breaks down because people don't envision themselves or see themselves or have experiences within those spaces that can really inhibit the work that they do. And so really thinking about the importance of integrating diversity, equity, inclusion into the science that we do. So from there, I then in 2018 was appointed into the role within the college to really be that change and to enact that change that I really wanted to see as a student, and to serve as the assistant dean for diversity and inclusion in our college. Really focus on that, and really focusing on the inclusive and equitable climate that we want to see, to ensure that our members feel that they're valued, that they're welcomed, that they are affirmed, and that they can really thrive professionally in those spaces. And so I think a lot of people, and some of the pushback that I sometimes get is that people don't understand why we need to have these conversations within engineering or within atmospheric science, right? They say this is the work of the humanities and let us just do our science, let us just do our engineering. But I think what I've learned over time is that if we don't see this as a foundational component of how we do our work and why we do our work, then we will never be successful in those spaces. And I think lots of folks really want to think about how can we just increase numbers? Like it's always just a numbers game. And I would like to push to how do we go beyond those numbers to think about, the environment that we have to be in, that we can do our best work in, and how can we be productive in those spaces. So in this job, I do a lot of strategic planning and implementation efforts. I really engage in cooperative and collaborative efforts and focus a lot of my time on how we can meet people where they're at, to encourage them to have conversations around diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, and really be mindful of kind of what are we even meaning when we say these words, right? Like I think we throw out diversity, equity, inclusion, just like we say, A, B, C, D, E, F in the alphabet, right? And so how can we really be very intentional and think about what each of these individual words means in those spaces? If it's related to kind of dismantling barriers to resources and opportunities, that's kind of the justice perspective. Is it related to equity and allocating resources to ensure, oops, sorry about that, to ensure that everyone has access to the same type of opportunities? Is it the diversity that we speak, and not just from an ethnic perspective, but also think about our diversity of thought, our diversity of perspective, and how that makes us do the best work that we do? And finally, thinking about inclusion, how are we fostering a sense of belonging by centering this as a value, but also amplifying the voices of people that are out there and the identities that we have in our many different spaces? And so also, I just think that JEDI is a really cool acronym, and it sounds so much better than DEI, right? So I think anyone who likes those Star Wars references, here's something else for you that helps you kind of really think about what this really means. And so the work that I do here at CSU is very much focused on JEDI within, these three distinct areas. How can we grow as individuals, increase our own awareness, our own competencies? How can we really evaluate what it's like within our organizational culture, our organizational climates, and then to think about kind of the systemic policies, structures, physical spaces that really inhibit the work that we do. And I think the final thing that I'll maybe say here is just, I think it's extremely important to not separate this. Like, we can't separate who we are from the work that we do, right? We are human people. We are human beings, I guess is what I wanted to say probably. We're human beings. We all have our own lived experiences. And like, to not bring that into the work that we do is, I think, a loss, right? And I think it's really important that we think about this as a foundation to how we do our work, and that it should show up in our teaching, in our research, in our service, in our engagement. And it shouldn't just be a side program over here. Someone's trying to request control of my screen, just by the way, I don't know why. But I think it's something that can't just be a side add-on, right? It's really important that it's it's incorporated into all of the different things that we do. And also to be mindful that in order to integrate this into the workplace culture, it cannot be a responsibility of, someone like me or someone who's leading diversity initiatives in those capacities, right? It's really important that it's a collective community effort, because we all have a responsibility to make the change that we want to see. And I think I'll just skip over some of these things. But I think the final thing that I want to say, in addition to thinking about JEDI, I think it's also really important that we think about kind of the systemic issues that are out there. And I've been very much engaged in a number of calls to action from STEM. And I don't know how many of you have seen these different calls that have been out there, but here are just two different calls related to creating an anti-racist science community from geoscientists of color. And so I think it's important that we all take the time to listen, that from that listening, we can then act and then also lead in the different spaces that we're in. And these two different calls to action really provide strategies for many professional societies, government agencies, and academic departments for them to evaluate, what is their community efforts like, and how does even just racism or systemic racism show up in many of those different spaces. And finally, kind of people have been asking me a lot recently, especially this year, even more so here in the US maybe, the urgency of acting now. We've seen a lot of social injustices out there, racial injustices that are out there. And it's important to know that these things are also prevalent within the scientific community that we're in. It also kind of can distract from our work of the science that we're doing as well. And I think, we talk a lot about representation in STEM. It's not getting better, but the only way that it will get better is if we can all collectively work on this together, right? And so I think more sustained and more intentional efforts will really be a way in which we can make that difference that we want to see. but we have to be collaborative, we have to be better informed, and we also have to better connect with one another to make that work actually come forth. So I've kind of shifted from thinking about just diversity to JEDI to now thinking about how do we also create an anti-racist community in that space as well. So I think it's something that I would like to challenge all of you all to think about. What are the actionable strategies that you all can do from the individual perspective to the organizations that you work in, to thinking even more largely into kind of the scientific enterprise that we're in, to encourage you to think about it, to act about it, and also to lead in those particular ways. And I think the final thing and what I'll say here is that it's really important for all of us to think about what is the community that we need, what is the community that we need to help us do our best work, and to ensure that that community is filled with the people who really want to see you succeed in your life. And so I share that because I think ultimately what I found over all of my experiences so far is the importance of community and the importance of truly being who you are and showing up every day to do the work that you do. So with that, I want to thank you all for listening to my journey, to my experiences. And I know I didn't talk as much about my science, and I'm happy to come back and do that on another day, but I hope that there was something that you all are able to take away and also to use in your individual work in that way. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Melissa. That's just fantastic. Obviously, we are doing something right. We do have some trolls and some issues going on. So I think we are doing exactly what we need to be doing today. But thank you very much. I loved the story. I loved how, you're not quite in Tornado Alley, but that was such a big part of your childhood and that drove you into science. It's one of those things, isn't it, how we look back and work out what did prompt us into these science worlds. I think what we're going to do is we will open it up for questions, but what we're going to do is we're going to ask you to type in your question for Melissa into chat, and we'll be able to read them out for you.
Donna, the meeting is locked, so no one can join. I think we do have full control, so I would feel comfortable because we can remove anyone from the meeting immediately and unmute people. So no one new can join the meeting, and I can remove anyone who's disruptive. So I would feel quite comfortable in unmuting people, if that's okay.
All righty. Well, if Melissa's happy with that, we'll go with that one. And that'll, if you put a physical hand up, if you put your video on, and we can go from there.
All right.
All righty, there we go. Beatrix, if you'd like to start.
Thank you so much, Melissa, for an absolutely fantastic, insightful, and open and honest account of your story, and a fantastic challenge to us as well. And I want to highlight also a big thank you to Dan Jones, who actually made the introduction to you, because you studied together at some stage. I was very struck by A, your journey, and B, by the approach that you take in your college and the challenge you have thrown out to us. You mentioned that you're looking at the individual, organizational, and systemic areas. And I think from our side, we would love to build bridges as much as is possible to help us learn from each other. And so all the investment that is going on elsewhere already, that we don't start reinventing the wheel. Of course, there are cultural differences and language differences in between the UK and the US. BIPOC versus BAME, etc., is a good example of that. I wonder if you had any ideas of how we, as a next step, could collaborate and work together constructively on that systemic change within the science community.
Yeah, thank you for your question there. I will agree there are some cultural differences, but I don't think that should inhibit any type of collaboration that we may see. I think something that I've learned a lot, in particular this year, is the value of the individual growth first. because I think we all are kind of coming at this from a variety of different perspectives, and we're all at different levels of our growth charts and also our learning edges in those spaces. So I have very much been focused on how do we, and I don't like to call it training people, but how do we work with people to be more introspective first, and to really figure out where maybe some of their blind spots may be, or where their assumptions or where their biases may be, because that does show up as we then move to the organizational environment and climate and kind of the systemic processes that are out there as well. I have also ran into issues from that systemic lens. When you think about, many institutions, there's different hierarchies that show up in that space, and some people who are more willing to take the time to review the policies that are at hand and see how they may be either sexist or racist or whatever it may be in that space. But I think an initial step for collaboration is to really sit down and think about, the organization that you may be in, and what does that look like? And are there policies that really do impact certain groups more than others? And how can we ensure that our policies are advantageous for almost the most marginalized group? Because from there, we will see changes that occur for the benefits for everyone in that space.
Thank you.
I see
Thank
Hugh.
you. Yep, Hugh.
Hi, that was an amazing talk. Actually, it covered so many things. I have about 1 million questions to ask you, but I kind of don't want to go too far. But it does resonate, as Bea was saying, with loads of things we've been trying to do with the Polar Horizon scheme and other things within UK Polar Science. But I want to take it back to you kind of personally now, because it was a really good personal journey, and I really like the way you told your story. But I kind of feel like if this world was a better place, what else could you have achieved if you hadn't had to put all of your energy into this? And I resent that on your behalf, but that's a stupid thing for me to do. So do you think your career would have been massively different if you hadn't felt that way at the start of going to university?
I wish I was a fortune teller. I don't know.
No, this I think is an unfair question. Sorry, but it's just that
it is
thing
a little
of
bit. So
how much work have you done that has helped everybody else? And most scientists just work for themselves in theory.
Right. I think I personally don't think I would have wanted any of that to be differently at this point. I think I had to learn a lot about myself in that space. And I think personal reflection is such a key thing, right? To think about why we are even here, or how do we even get to where we are. I don't know. I feel like I just use it as fuel to help me grow and to learn. And again, I thought I was on the track to just be like a straight, I don't want to call it traditional, but I guess traditional research scientist. And I was just going to go in that way. But I feel like because of those experiences, it called me to do something different, because I saw and I heard from younger people as to not even realizing that this is something that they could do, right? So I think a lot about my impact, and am I okay with my impact just being the scientific work that I'm doing? Or do I want to see impact in a very different way? And I feel, and I'm reminded on a daily basis, even from students in our college right now, I will admit to say that I am the only Black faculty member in this College of Engineering. And our number of Black students in our college who, when they learned about me, were so grateful for the fact that they had someone that they could see being successful in that space. So as much as you don't always want to be a role model for people because you feel as though you may be guiding them in the wrong way, I think because I can model the different roles that I have, it is more impactful for the people who will come in the future. So I probably didn't answer your question at all.
No, it was better than my question.
Change anything, and I don't regret anything. Yes, I wish certain things would not have happened, and I could have talked about lots of other things, but I chose to not go there in that route. But we all have things that happen to us, right? And they all kind of shift the way that we move and the journeys that we go on. So how do we learn and grow and use that as fuel to really make the impact that we want to see?
Cool. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Dan.
Hi, Melissa. Good to see you.
Hey, Dan.
I think I don't have a super well formulated question, but I wanted to say thank you for your talk. It was really good. And I'd wondered if I could get your thoughts on this. And I partly apologize to the BAS people here. They've heard me say this before, so I'm starting to sound like a broken record, I think. But a few months ago, I kind of had this, not exactly realization, I got a bit lucky. So this list showed up, it was just on Twitter. This list showed up on Twitter that people were adding themselves to. It was a list of people who like black and minority people in the geosciences broadly. So folks were adding themselves onto this list and like their field and what institute they were in. And I opened it up and found someone who was doing work that was really similar to what one of my master's students is interested in. I got them in touch, and they've now started working together and collaborating. And that got me thinking about, like, that was so useful for me. And it got me thinking about how, as researchers, our networks tend to be kind of just based on inertia, you know, who we know and who those people know. And, you know, you might become aware of a couple big people in the field here or there as they pop up. But it just got me thinking about, like, okay, that's a place where I could be more intentional. I could seek out and just make sure that I'm not missing anybody who actually would be like great to collaborate with, that they're just not on my radar. So I wondered, you mentioned that it was so important when you found that kind of community, and that was an amazing part of the story that I think is pretty crucial. And I did warn you, this isn't a well formulated question, but what do you think that role is of like intentional networking? And I feel like it's kind of a responsibility on people who are in research and who are especially kind of starting to establish themselves. And like that's on us to make sure that we're being outward looking enough to come to find the people who would be great to collaborate with.
Yeah, I think, thank you for your question, Dan. I would say we all like to work with people, you know, who we like, right? And you tend to be in very small circles of, you know, who you formulate research ideas with, who you have conversations with in that space. And I would say, yes, it's good to be intentional and reach out to people in that space. But are you, I guess the question to you is to think about, why are you asking, right? Are you being, are you wanting to work on something that is mutually beneficial to both? Like, that's how I always, you know, consider reaching out to folks in that space. It's like, I found this work to be very intriguing and I'd love to have future conversations with you. And I find something that happens specifically, I'll just use the context of here in the United States, within institutions that are minority serving, people reach out to those institutions because they just want to check a box of, I connect with people of color in a certain space. Right. Which that also lends to is the impact of marginalization of those folks as well. Right. So if you approach it from the lens of, you are very interested and intrigued by the work that they're doing, and you can formulate a relationship in that space, then you're being more intentional, right? And so, you know, in working with our faculty, and you may have known this from when you were here at CSU, is how can we really be intentional and develop relationships that are actually trustworthy relationships? You probably never even think about, like, are we developing a relationship of trust in that way? So with that, it also takes time. So you can't just say, hey, I'm going to reach out to this person on this list and we're going to do this thing because this is the way that I want to do it. So that's that self-serving piece. And so how can we come to it, you know, and meet each other in the middle in order to work together in that space? So I think intentional networking is good, but I think you have to also ensure that you're not marginalizing in any group. Like, as another example, I'm so happy to be here to talk with you all today. I have a connection with you in that sort of way. But I will say this year, given, you know, a lot of the racial things that have happened here in the United States, I have probably received 50 emails about coming and giving seminars at a variety of different places in the country, right? Then I think, why are they asking me this, right? Are they asking me this now because they feel like they have to check their boxes for their diversity plans? Or are they asking me because they're very much interested in the work that I'm doing? And I have to grapple with that, and I don't even have to tell that person, right? Like, I just think about it in my head, and it is what it is, right? Or would you be asking me that if, you know, we weren't in the midst of a pandemic? Like, I think about the typical numbers that I would get normally, and now the ridiculousness of it all in this current state that we're in. And a lot of the times I have to just take it in and just deal with it, right? Like, you just bring it back in. I will never say it out loud. I mean, I'm saying it to you and it's recorded, but don't share it in that space. But it's just something that I have to think about, right? And I pick and choose the opportunities that I think, again, it goes back to the impact, like I said to Hugh, right? Like, how can I really think about the impact that I'm going to make in that space? And do I have connections, or do I know someone, or have I developed a relationship with someone? Or is this just a cold call thing so that they can just say that they have someone?
That's a really good point. Thank you.
I don't know. You probably didn't answer your question there either.
No, that was like, no, that was a very logical and very useful follow on to what I said. Yeah, really, thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Melissa. Pilvi.
Hi, Melissa. Thank you again so much for your talk. And it really made me think a lot already before this talk. I was thinking about it. You know, we're having to reach out to a Black atmospheric scientist on the other side of the world to give a Black History Month talk, because we do lack those role models around us in our community, and that's extremely clear. And I think that's, I'm not sure if I'm going to ask a question, but I just think it's a reflection on everything that you were saying, kind of like that, the need to do things mindfully and really think about that extra, like going that extra mile and doing, not just doing it for the sake of a month, or doing it for the sake of a list, but actually thinking about how can we change that culture, and how can we have that conversation. And I think one of the initiatives that we have going on at BAS, it's doing this EDI 101 training, which is basically a form of unconscious bias training, but we're doing it by BAS people for BAS people. And I guess that's where we're trying to head with the conversation, to start with that. And I think it's a message that I really like, that there's some senior leadership on the call today as well, you know, that we need to support like that step beyond, and really not worry too much about tokenism, not worry too much about you know, how can this be perceived, but be very clear on why we want to do this work, and just keep at it. And I think that's really important at the end of the day. And also, I wanted to note that I really want to go on an icebreaker as well. And my role is impact facilitator at BAS. So if we can connect in any sort of way, I will.
Okay, great. And I think I agree with you there. You know, the messaging of the importance and the value in seeing it within our work should also come from senior leadership, but also come up, right? So you can think about it from both directions as to the value. And I think about our dean here in the college and in his messaging, and how over the last few years, I've even seen kind of the change in him, just based off of conversations that we have, and how he shares that messaging, not just, you know, our diversity week or diversity symposium week, or in particular weeks or particular months that celebrate particular heritages, but how can we really ensure that that conversation is something that continues, right? Even just thinking about, you know, this year and the Black Lives Matter movement, are we going to continue to have these discussions beyond the news cycles, right? Right. Black Lives Matter started years ago, right? But it became an awakening for so many people this year. And will we continue? We've already seen it die down right now that the media cycle hasn't talked about it anymore. But like, if we're making commitments to do this type of work, we have to continue this type of work after it's on the news, after it shows up on your Twitter or whatever social media things that you may have. Like, how are you ensuring that you are shifting the way that you think and the way that you work on a daily basis? Because that's really when the change actually happens.
Yeah. No, thank you. That's excellent. I think the value of you being able to speak with us is that I've already got affirmation for some of the things that we have been doing on these programs, but also new ideas and, you know, new energy and that focus, because, you know, not everything works straight away. So I think there's enormous value. I've got one little question for you. On your bio, you're also involved in external boards and committees and networks. You're a vice president of the US Women's Earth Network. Is that correct?
Earth Science Women's Network.
Yeah. Okay. Can you tell us and share with us a little bit why you are also involved in those external sort of networks, but what you think the value is for you?
I'll say for me, particularly related to the Earth Science Women's Network, was when I actually was an undergrad, I think was my first engagement with them. And it was an opportunity to see more women who were engaged in the geosciences, and this group, which is a nonprofit organization now, very much focused on career advancement and support of women in the earth sciences at the time. And how can we, you know, welcome the scientists of today, but also look to the scientists of the future to ensure that they see themselves as scientists. And so I was very much excited by the mission of the organization, and also the support of other women around me, and even outside of the atmospheric sciences, right? So thinking about geologists and other people in that area. I can't think of other disciplines.
There are only geologists. There are only geologists.
I just think about this. So, but I think, you know, I was very excited about their mission and their support, and just being able to have them as a community of people where I can say, you know, I was thinking about doing this. Has anyone experienced this? Or this just happened to me. How should I respond in this certain way? So I think it's important to engage, you know, in and outside of my actual job that I'm doing. And so how can we really look to working with, you know, future populations in that way? I will say I'm also very much engaged in professional societies within the American Meteorological Society, but also the American Geophysical Union. And similarly, to do this type of work, right? How can we really say that we care about our science if we don't think about the people who are doing our science? And yeah, I just think it's really important in that capacity.
I think so too, and thank you. So I think we're nearly on time. Again, thank you so much for sharing your journey and a little touching on your science. And you've got the right crowd here to try and get you onto an icebreaker. I think this is exactly the right crew you should be talking to. I'm going to be taking forward your Jedi mantra. I love that. And I think the justice element is absolutely key, not only this year, but always as we move forward. Sincerely, thank you so much for joining us in your morning time and sharing your story and your work as you go forward in both science and diversity and inclusion. So Melissa, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, and also for all of your wonderful questions and listening, right? It's also like you put yourself sometimes in a very vulnerable perspective or a vulnerable state to share your personal thing. But I thank you all for listening, and I encourage you also to do that same thing as you talk to other people in those spaces. So thank you again. I hope you all have a wonderful evening and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thanks
Thank you again.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Oops.
Do you want to hang on the line, Melissa, just a second?
Oh, sure, I can.
Just so that we can give an extra thank you to you. I think I'm going to do